Good morning, dear colleagues. I extend my heartfelt thanks to the members of the steering committee for graciously inviting me to this conference. Your invitation is both an honor and a privilege. I also wish to express my profound gratitude to Martin, the project coordinator of Engaging, for his impeccable support in facilitating my participation today. I thank you all for making this possible. Allow me to provide a contextual backdrop for this presentation. The United Nations Program on Aging, as Sasha has kindly mentioned, who led it in the past before I joined the UN in New York, is the focal point on aging within the United Nations system, and it is situated within the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, DESA, at the headquarters in New York. Our team facilitates the work of the newly formalized UN Interagency Group on Aging, and as its permanent co-chair. To date, the group comprises of 32 members. Notable additions include entities such as the International Trade Center, the World Tourism Organization, the Universal Postal Union, and the UN Environmental Program, among others. The team provides intergovernmental support, drafts reports of the Secretary General to analyze trends and advise on policy options, and we stand ready to provide technical expertise and support to member states upon their request. We live in an aging world. That is what I said last month in response to a delegate from an African country who remarked to me, "We have a predominantly youthful population. Aging is of no concern to us." I understand why immediate policy priorities for that delegation might focus on youth-related issues over population aging, which may not seem as urgent in comparison. However, I cannot help but wonder if there might be a perception that aging issues are more relevant to more developed countries with longer life expectancies and more substantial aging populations. The reality is that population aging is irreversible and it is global. Today, Europe and North America combined have the highest share of older persons. But here's what projections tell us over the next 3 decades. Eastern, Central, and Southern Asia will account for more than 60% of the global increase in older persons, suggesting that these regions need to prepare for the challenges and opportunities associated with an aging population. Northern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Western Asia will see the fastest growth in the number of older persons. This contradicts perceptions, for example, that aging may not be a concern for many African countries. Even if the current focus is on a youthful population, it is crucial to plan for the rapidly aging population soon. The number of people aged 80 years or over is projected to increase by more than 200% in the rest of the world, compared to a 10 to 60% increase in Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand. This drastic increase indicates that necessary measures should be undertaken even in regions that currently have younger demographics. So yes, my answer remains, we live in an aging world. When I say extended longevity, my colleague at Population Division says compression of mortality. It's like debating whether the glass is bottomless or dangerously close to running dry. But no matter what you call it, our shared objective is the same: to make the most out of the time we have. As longevity increases, it's surprising to note that many individuals seem unaware of the implications. A recent survey conducted by a firm earlier this year sheds light on this issue. It revealed that only 24% of respondents can be considered longevity literate. This disparity was evident across various regions, with rates ranging from 31% in France and 29% in China to a mere 18% in the United States. Particularly alarming is the notable gap observed between the desired and the statutory retirement ages, especially among younger demographics. Furthermore, the survey uncovered a significant gender disparity concerning longevity literacy. While this study may lack scalability, its findings underscore a concerning reality. These observations are not only relevant to an individual level, but also hold significant implications when considering public policy measures. 6 years from now, when the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the United Nations Decade of Healthy Aging end, average longevity is expected to be 82 years in the more developed regions and 73 years in the less developed ones. By then, life expectancy at age 65 is predicted to reach 21 years in the more developed regions and 17 years in the less developed regions. Of course, considering the global impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on trends and patterns of morbidity and mortality, future trends are uncertain, at least in the short term. My colleague, the renowned economist Andrew Scott, has articulated a vision of moving from an aging society to a longevity society, focusing on not just adding more years to life, but enhancing the quality of those years. I would love to quote him. An aging society begins when there are lots of people aged over 65. A longevity society begins when there are lots of people who can expect to live beyond 65. End of quote. I agree. This is not only about focusing on those who are old, but also a focus on how we age. Because like it or not, aging does not begin when a person becomes old. However, and while these insights are invaluable, I believe we need to move forward by embracing both the realities of an aging society and the opportunities of a longevity society. While all regions have seen substantial increases in life expectancy, striking inequalities persist both among and within countries. While considerable progress has been made in closing the difference in life expectancy at birth between countries, the gap remains wide. In 2021, life expectancy in the least developed countries lagged 7 years behind the global average, due largely to persistent high levels of child and maternal mortality, and in some countries to violence and conflicts, or the continuing impact of the HIV epidemic. The disparity between the country with the highest and the country with the lowest life expectancy at birth stood at 33.4. Think about it. That is more than 3 decades of missed life experiences, opportunities, and time with loved ones. Inequalities do not emerge suddenly at older ages. They follow and feed on people's different experiences throughout their lives. A person's country of birth, family, education, employment path, living arrangements, and social networks affect well-being in later life, as do gender, ethnicity, and other characteristics. From a policy perspective, it is important to understand the influences across the life course that underlie inequalities in later life, and how different national and local contexts shape this process, because inequality need not increase in old age. You likely have heard of the UN global goals that I had mentioned earlier, the Sustainable Development Goals, that governments committed to achieving by the year 2030. At midway point of implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, we analyzed 329 voluntary national reports presented at the high-level political forum between 2016 to date. While the relevance of population aging for government policies is well documented, interventions to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals fall short of responding to the demographic shift. As population aging is growing in intensity around the world, so too must policy action. In the reporting by governments, some connections are clear. A quarter of the voluntary national reports that referred to older persons under the Sustainable Development Goals did so under Goal 8, decent work and economic growth. Older people should have the option of continuing to work for as long as they desire and are able to do so. And countries at all stages of population aging should take proactive and forward-looking measures to adapt and innovate their labor markets and pension to ensure that support for older persons is both adequate and fiscally sustainable. Other connections, however, were not captured. For example, only 8% of the voluntary national reports that referred to older persons under these goals did so under Goal 4, quality education. 10%, sorry. Even though greater labor productivity depends on investing in education and skills of people of all ages, including during the demographic transition towards older societies. And only 3% of the reports that mentioned older persons in the context of the goals did so under Goal 13, climate action. This is surprising given the evidence of older persons' vulnerabilities to climate change and also their commitment to environmental health and well-being for future generations, drawing from their extensive knowledge and lived experiences. Research conducted in the United Kingdom demonstrates that older persons are equally likely as younger individuals to recognize the urgency of climate action and are willing to make significant sacrifices to protect the environment. However, they continue to receive limited visibility in media coverage and public discourse, as evidenced here. A report issued by the United Nations in 2021 found that ageism takes on different forms across the life course. A teenager might, for instance, be ridiculed for starting a political movement. Both older and younger persons might be denied a job because of their age. And an older woman might be accused of witchcraft and driven out of her home and village, if not burned and killed. To be clear and fair to history, it was Robert Butler who coined the term ageism in the 1960s to describe the systematic discrimination against older persons. And he equated it to racism and sexism during the civil rights movement. The UN report, perhaps unfaithful to Butler's work, viewed ageism as stereotypes, how we think, prejudice, how we feel, and discrimination, how we act, that are directed towards people on the basis of their age, any age. So ageism can be institutional, interpersonal, or if internalized, it can turn against oneself, what is called self-directed. We do not really know the scale of ageism. The data used in the report points to 1 in 2 people worldwide being ageist against older persons. In Europe, the only region for which we had data on youth, younger people reported more perceived age discrimination than other age groups. I have listened to many intergenerational events at the United Nations. An older speaker could relate to discrimination based on age, their current older age and their younger age in the past. Younger speakers often focus on age-based discrimination against youth, and I can understand that, because youth cannot speak to discrimination against an age that a young person is yet to attain. This is why providing space in the United Nations platforms for older persons themselves, for self-representation, matters. All older people will have lived through childhood, youth, middle age, into older age. Only they can speak to ageism in older ages based on their lived experience. From my personal reflections, many seats at the UN are filled by older persons, whether it's senior UN leadership, starting with our Secretary General himself, or experts or delegations. However, they do not necessarily represent this constituency, nor do they self-advocate. Many, in my experience, refer to older persons as a distant social group that does not relate to them. And against a backdrop of prevalent ageism against older persons, their aspirations, preferences, and choices are often overlooked. Participation is a critical component of the realization of human rights and a right unto itself. This is why the Secretary General, in his report to the General Assembly, called upon governments to strengthen the involvement of older persons in international fora by including them in national delegations to the General Assembly and upcoming global summits. To my knowledge, it has been a year since the Secretary General made this call, and no government has yet to do so. Both the international plans of action on youth and on aging refer to intergenerational issues. As such, the agendas of youth and older persons at the UN are connected. But we see a social group silo mentality. In my view, this results in different generations having competing interests and claims, which may open doors to difficult trade-offs during negotiations at the UN. Policy choices that support solidarity between generations in a context of population aging and extended longevity are multifold and entail innovative and far-reaching transformations and structural reforms. Labor markets, family policies, policies to strengthen human capital and the labor force, pension systems, and the principles that underpin our current economic arrangements all need to better reflect and adapt to the new demographic configuration of the world. This calls for reimagining and updating the basic notions that underpin the tools we use to examine the impact of population aging and increased longevity. It involves questioning the assumptions upon which current economic indicators and measurements are based, applying a life course approach, and bringing attention to the ramifications of economic and social inequality to population aging. It is also crucial to better quantify and reflect the real and meaningful contributions of older persons to their societies and to economies. Integrating a life course approach to working lives involves challenging the traditional model of 3 linear and distinct stages of education, work, then retirement. Novel policy ideas are required to replace this one-way career linear path and offer options to exit and re-enter the labor force as able or needed throughout the life course. This would allow persons of all generations to experience more flexible life transitions, to redistribute time dedicated to paid work, lifelong learning, and intergenerational support of family members when needs arise. The future is full of uncertainties. The impact of groundbreaking innovations, such as artificial intelligence, or the medium and long-term consequences of climate change in all areas of our lives, point to the difficulty of foresight and attempting to plan for the future. Population aging and the extension of the lifespan are, however, not among those unknowns. Nor are their anticipated negative impacts in the public domain inevitable. It is a fact that populations are aging and living longer, and whether countries are already advanced or have only started these processes, projections show that this global trend will characterize the demographic makeup of future societies. In a future where, for the first time, up to 6 generations will coexist, we need adequate policies and choices that apply an intergenerational approach to harness the potential and opportunities that population aging and longevity bring individuals, families, and societies. Here you can see some upcoming global summits. The Secretary General characterized the Summit of the Future that's going to take place in September this year as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reinvigorate global action, recommit to fundamental principles, and further develop the frameworks of multilateralism so they are fit for the future. The key word here is future. A future where 1 in 4 people globally will be aged 60 years or over. A future where half the countries will have life expectancies of 75 years or more. A future where most older persons will live in less developed regions. Yet, the current revision of the outcome of the summit, what is called the Pact of the Future, does not mention that the world is aging, nor the fact that people now live longer than ever. In a 20-page long document, there's only one reference to older persons as part of a list of vulnerable groups. Just like present generations, future generations will encompass people of all ages, from children and youth to adults to older persons. However, the current revision of the Declaration on Future Generations, another negotiated outcome document, recognizes youth as critical agents of change while mentioning older persons only in the context of intergenerational solidarity. It is essential to consider people's needs and rights across the entire life course. I asked about this, and I was told that the rationale behind the focus on youth may be that their lives will extend further into the future, giving them a special affinity to future generations. While this is true, that today's youth will indeed live further into the future, it is important to remember that they will not remain as youth. I mean, I'm a fan of the song Forever Young, but come on, the reality is that these youngsters will grow into adults and eventually into older persons. So we are all on the same page. It is important to know that the Declaration defines future generations as all those who do not yet exist. So if you journey with me into that future, say the year 2050, we will see that future generations in more developed countries are projected to spend more than twice as much of their lives as older persons than as youth. Similarly, future generations in less developed regions are expected to live almost twice as long in older age as compared to their youth years. And remember, all of this is set to take place against a backdrop where the number of older persons is projected to be more than 3 times the number of children under 5 and about 2/3 higher than the number of youth worldwide. Despite all of these facts, and delegates know them very well, issues such as population aging, the role of older persons, and extended longevity remain largely overlooked by governments when they negotiate texts about the future. It's truly mind-boggling. In contemplating our current state, I feel compelled to express uncertainty regarding our readiness, at least at the UN, for the future. To be candid, as we navigate this uncertainty, the imperative for a Third World Assembly on Aging becomes increasingly evident. This proposal emphasizes the critical need for international collaboration and dialogue on aging and longevity-related issues. And while governments ultimately hold the decision-making power of whether or not to hold such an assembly, it is crucial to acknowledge that we cannot simply project the past into the future. Despite the last International Plan of Action, MIPA, being 20 years young, it remains relevant, signaling its enduring importance to decision makers. Nevertheless, convening a new World Assembly presents an opportunity to update the Plan of Action and to renew our commitment to the evolving reality. The reality that I had shared with that delegate from the African country, that we live in an aging world. I look forward very much to your discussions and presentations today to learn from all of you and take it back to our work in New York, and I thank you very much for your attention.